Hi, in this video we'll be taking an in-depth look at grid controllers by Intech Studio. These are the controllers BU16 on the left and EN16 on the right. And we'll have a look at how these work together with MIDIGrade. MIDIGrade works with basically any MIDI controller, but I've decided to feature these as the flagship for very specific reasons. First, they utilize modern technologies like the USB-C plug. They attach to each other using magnets, and they serve power to each other via these visible connectors. Second, Intech Studio embraces and practices open source standards. What this means is that you are more free to be creative and customize these parts to meet your own needs. Here, for example, we're looking at these beautiful laser engraved font panels, which have been custom made for MIDIGrade. In these panels, we've been able to fit in all the main features of DaVinci Resolve color page and the logic on how to manipulate them. More about that later. Another thing I love about these controllers is how they have a very satisfying tactile feel to the buttons and knobs, and how incredibly compact they are. They've even fitted a small button in the bottom side, which we'll get back to later. What really sold me is how you can orient these whichever way you like. So no matter what your workspace is like, you should always be able to find an orientation of EN16 and BU16 that suits you. Now let's have a look at how we set them up to work with MIDIGrade. Here we are in Grid Editor, which is the software that lets us customize grid controllers. I have factory reset these two, so this setup should represent your experience setting up quite accurately. Let's begin by plugging one of them to our computer, then I'll connect them to each other. And as you can see, we have a digital representation of them on the screen. Now we navigate to search and type in MIDIGrade. These pre-made profiles uploaded to Grid Editor's profile cloud will show up. With BU16 profile selected, let's click Load Profile. And once it's loaded, we'll confirm the made changes by selecting Store. Now let's do the same for EN16. Load Profile. We wait for the profile to be loaded. And once done, we again select Store. Finally, I'm waiting for the lights to reset. Once they're done, you should see the lights according to this pattern. There's colored lights next to the menu buttons, and the rest are off. Okay, we're done. Now we simply open MIDIGrade, make sure we have grid selected in the MIDI input device, we have the correct screen resolution selected, we're running DaVinci Resolve 19 Studio with dual screen toggled off, and bottom menu visible. Done. Let's have a look at how to use them with MIDIGrade. We have these 6 menus over here. These 9 functions are always the same regardless of the menu selected. And this versatile shift button over here. EN16 features 16 limitless encoder knobs, which are also clickable. Now, for example, if we want to make an adjustment, I'll select the menu first. And let's use tint over here. As you can see, it features a very nice fine resolution for adjustment. Now let's do saturation. We'll go to Curves menu and increase 60% for highlights. And with 20%, let's move the cursor like so and create an S-curve. Now to see the change we've made, here's the node off and on. That's the basic logic we follow to make adjustments. The other menus are primaries wheels, bars, and log wheels, and back to primaries wheels, HDR color wheels, and repeat press toggles between the wheels, curves, hue versus sat versus luminance, qualifier, and window. The functions are previous node, next node, add serial node, add node before, add parallel node, node off and on, grade off and on, undo, and playback. Now if we hold the shift button down, these become reverse playback. Next clip, previous clip, append node, add outside node, add layer node, and then the grade toggle turns into delete node button. And here's reset node. Finally, down here, we've got redo. There are also some hidden features, like to toggle highlight, you simply select the qualifier menu again. Or by pressing the window button again, you can create a circular power window. But that's not all what the shift button can do. Let's adjust the window size here. And what if I want to make that adjustment faster? Well, by holding shift down, now you can see the adjustment takes place much faster. Oh, here's the pan of the window, very slow. We can instead press the knob down as we turn and trigger the same acceleration. There's also reset. Simply press one of the knobs and it will reset the adjustment. Okay, with the window menu selected, here's highlight, toggle outline. Toggle outline is super useful, so you can see clearly what your window is affecting. And we can also create other window shapes with these buttons over here. If I have one of the menu's primary adjustments, HDR-grade, or curves selected, with shift, these become reference wipe. Second row has stills navigation with buttons previous still and next still. Here's invert wipe. And the third row has next frame and previous frame. Wheels and bars menu changes these to keyframe controls. So let's add a keyframe, move forward a couple of frames. I'm going to add a circular window and move it a tiny bit like this. Let's go back to the second menu and add another keyframe. Let's select the previous keyframe, go back to the window menu and move the window to another position. Now you can see we have the window moving like so. Finally, I'll clear these keyframes using the delete keyframe button. There's one more hidden feature I'd like to show, which is located in the qualify menu. Let's use the cursor to make a selection like this. And now, holding shift button, these become toggles for hue, saturation, and luminance, and resets for the all three. And that rounds up the basic logic behind the use of grid controllers with MIDIGrade. Before I show you example grades, I'd like to demonstrate the ultimate minimalist controller. What could be more compact than these two controllers, you ask? The answer is, of course, using just one of them. So now with only EN16 connected to the computer, in Grid Editor I'll search for MIDIGrade again. Before loading, we'll select Bank 2. Now we select the profile Solo EN16 and load profile. We again wait for it to be loaded, and then once ready, we select Store. The device will restart now, and you can see it will switch back to Bank 1. Here's where that hidden button comes to play, as with it you can toggle between the banks. We press it to switch to Bank 2, and what we'll notice is the same menu lights appear. That's how we know you're successfully loaded into the Solo EN16 profile. Instead of resetting adjustments, the knob presses now behave exactly like the button presses on BU16. Now we can access all of the menus like we did before. I'll create a window and demonstrate that the shift button is still there. We can still access all the features as we did before, only excluding resetting adjustments with no presses. For demonstration's sake, let's move to another clip. I'm going to append node. Let's go to primaries bars. I'm going to increase the luminance gain. Let's come down with greens. I'm going to decrease reds as well. I feel like adding some blue into lift. Okay, let's move on to hue versus saturation. And I feel like just bringing down the skin tones a bit. Here's before and after. In this next section, I'd like to show you two sample grades using footage from a Sony Burano. Here for reference, I'll use a still from the 2018 film Christopher Robin. What I like about it is the vibrant greens, lime creamy highlights, and rich and contrasty skin tones. I like to begin my process with roughly finding the contrast range between lightest and darkest parts of the image, and then setting the mid-range point using pivot. The beauty of color grading, like in arts in general, is that there is no one right answer. And this step could be achieved by a multitude of different methods, like using primaries wheels, HDR-grade, or color management. Next step is to find the skin tones. In this instance, I'll be using the curves tool for this, which works just fine for the skin tones. But as I try to apply the same approach to the yellows and greens of the image, bring them closer towards pure green like in the reference, we notice it also contaminates colors I'm not intending to manipulate, specifically the vibrant yellows of the sunflowers. This is part of the process too, which I decided to include in this sample, as it's equally valuable to try something, recognize it doesn't achieve what you want to do, and move to another possible solution. Here instead, I'm using the qualifier, which is a much more accurate tool. But you also need to be a bit more mindful when using it, as not set correctly, it will introduce lots of visual artifacts. This is why using curves can be better, because it tends to automatically feather made adjustments in a natural looking way. In this instance though, I need to exclude the more saturated parts, and HSL qualifier lets me do just that. Once the selection targets the parts I need and looks artifact free, I'm free to choose from different tools how to apply the change. I feel like going with primaries bars. One thing to note about the primaries wheels and bars is that they are the same tool. If you make changes in bars and switch to the wheels tab, you'll see the made changes appear there as well. So it's a completely subjective choice between primaries wheels and bars. I like the bars for their simplicity and accuracy. For me, it's easy to think in terms of let's take out a couple of ticks of red, add a bit more green, and so on. The next thing we're going to tackle is the highlights. HDR-grade is superb for this, as it offers very precise adjustments throughout the entire range of values that appear in our images. I'm simply bringing down the highlights and adding a healthy amount of green in them. You can be as rough or subtle with this adjustment as you want, as it's barely affecting skin tones, which we've already established. And that's how we create a simple look using 3 nodes. Here's the nodes one by one. And here's before and after. Notice how we used only EN16 with MIDIGrade to do all of this. In this next example, let's bring back the BU16. This is my preferred setup, as I just love the feel of these dedicated menu and function buttons. We still have the original EN16 profile saved into the controller, so all we have to do is navigate to it using the bottom side button as we did before. This next example loans for a very different look. With low-key lighting and bright highlights, I feel like the look of 1989 classic The Abyss will fit this well. I'll try and have a different approach to this, so you can see better the range of options that MIDIGrade offers. I'm going to start off by really boosting the saturation so I can better see what values we are dealing with in this footage. Over the years of color grading, I've learned to really appreciate broad brush strokes, and that's exactly what I'm applying here using primary softset. My goal here is to shift all of the values into the world where the reference exists. At this point, I'm not worried about the integrity of our whites or blacks, because I can always bring them back later. And that's a detail I don't want to worry about right now. I'm simply looking at the overall image and thinking, how can I dive deeper with it? Once I'm happy with the overall look, I'm going to direct my attention to the scopes and address any technical problems. Here, I've switched to the log wheels, which is a simpler version of HDR grade, if you will, and just bringing back those blacks towards neutral as much as I can without breaking anything. And then I'll finish it off with soft clip, which will let me bring everything to a legal limit. Pretty striking change for the very first node. Now I feel like the quote-unquote skin tones read quite flat to me, especially compared to our reference, which has more contrast. Since I don't mind adding contrast in the entire image, I'll again use a broad brush, and in curves will increase the lower end of highlights. Finally, I feel like this is still missing some of that punch. So what I'd like to do is add perceived contrast. I'll start by making a selection using qualifier, which again is the most accurate way of choosing parts of the image based on hue, saturation, and luminance. And once I'm happy with the selection, I want to select just the blue areas and need to make sure it's nice and soft so we can't see any of the borders. Only then I'll go to the primary adjustments menu. Here, I'll add a good amount of mid-tone detail, which will make the silhouette skin tones pop more. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. Again, we achieved a totally different look, which is fun. To me, it's a very fun practice to try and match footage to an already existing look. It really proves that we as artists are only learning from each other, and that creates connections spanning throughout history. One final thing I'd like to address in this grade is the clipping highlights. To fix this issue, I'll add more soft clip, high soft adjustment. Let's have a look at the original and the effect of each node. Here's before and after. This concludes the in-depth dive into what it's like to use the BU16 and EN16 grid controllers with MIDIGrade. I hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching.